My daughter-in-law pressured me to sign over my $2.6 million villa to her to compensate her for taking care of a senile old man. She told the entire family that I had abused her and thrown her and my son out onto the street, so I dropped a 45-second clip into the family group chat. Immediately, more than 40 relatives cut ties with her. But her own mother was even colder. She sent her daughter to jail without a shred of mercy. I'm truly thankful to have you here on Dad's Revenge Stories today. Leave a comment telling me your country or city so we can connect. Please keep in mind, this narrative incorporates fictional elements designed for entertainment and educational value. Any similarities to actual names or locations are entirely coincidental, but the valuable message behind it will stay with you. The phone started buzzing at 6 in the morning, while my hands were still wet from pulling the first crates of red snapper off the delivery truck. I am Gerald Holt. People around the harbor call me Jerry. I am 68 years old, and for 4 decades I have run the same fish stall at Pelican Cove Marina on the Central California coast. I wake up before the sun. I know every supplier by first name, every loyal customer by their usual order, and every tide chart for the next 30 days by heart. My stall is not fancy. It is a 15-foot counter with a hand-painted sign, a scale I have calibrated myself every single morning for the past 12 years, and a chest freezer that hums like an old friend. But this modest stretch of weathered wood has paid for my son's college education, my wife Margaret's medical treatments in her final years, and the mortgage on a house appraised last spring at $2.6 million, a property that sits on a bluff overlooking the same ocean I have stared at every morning of my adult life. I am not a wealthy man who dresses like one. I am a man who built something real quietly, one transaction at a time. My neighbor Earl Dixon set down his coffee thermos and walked over the moment my phone buzzed the 3rd time in under a minute. Earl is 70 years old and has sold vegetables from the stall next to mine for 31 years. He has a gray beard, trimmed close, permanent squint lines from decades of morning sun, and the unhurried manner of a man who stopped being surprised by people a long time ago. "Something's going on," he said, nodding at my phone. I peeled off one rubber glove and picked it up. The notification was from our family group chat, 43 members, including aunts, uncles, cousins, and their spouses, spread across California, Nevada, and Oregon. My daughter-in-law Brianna had posted at 5:47 in the morning. The message was long. I scrolled without blinking. She wrote that I had become dangerously forgetful, that I had been losing my temper without reason, that I had screamed at her and my son Marcus and physically forced them out of my house in the middle of the night with nowhere to go. She wrote that she had sacrificed years of her life caring for an aging, unstable man who could no longer be trusted to manage his own affairs. And then she wrote the part that made Earl, reading over my shoulder, go completely still. She said that the least I could do, the absolute minimum to compensate her for her years of selfless devotion, was to sign over the deed to my home. The house on the bluff. $2.6 million. She was giving me 5 days to do it. The responses came fast. A cousin I had not spoken to in 3 years wrote that she was heartbroken. An uncle posted a string of messages calling me selfish and cruel. A woman I barely recognized, someone's new wife, wrote that elderly men who abuse their caregivers should not be allowed to keep their assets. Earl straightened up slowly. His jaw was tight. "Jerry," he started. "I see it," I said. I read the entire post one more time from the beginning. Brianna had constructed the message carefully. Every sentence was designed to humiliate before it could be questioned. She had posted it at 5:47 on a Saturday morning when people wake up and reach for their phones, before they are fully awake, before their critical thinking has had its first cup of coffee. Smart, calculated, and built on a foundation that I already knew in my bones would not hold the weight she was putting on it. I set the phone face down on the counter. "You going to respond?" Earl asked. "Not yet," I said. I pulled my rubber glove back on and returned to the red snapper. The fish needed to be sorted by size and packed into the display ice before 7 when the first customers arrived. That was the job in front of me, and I intended to finish it. Earl watched me work for a moment. "She's telling 43 people you hit her and threw her out in the cold. I know what she's telling them. And you're sorting fish. The fish still needs sorting, Earl." He was quiet for a few seconds. Then, because he has known me long enough to understand when silence means something, "What are you going to do?" I lifted a 3-pound snapper, checked its eyes, clear, bright, fresh, and set it in the left column. I had run this stall through a recession, through Margaret's illness, through every difficult season this coast had thrown at me. I had built everything I owned by paying attention to what was real and ignoring what was noise. Brianna's message was noise, but beneath it, somewhere in the numbers and the timeline and the reasons she needed a $2.6 million house transferred into her name within 5 days, there was something real. And whatever that real thing was, it was the part I needed to find. I set down the snapper and looked at Earl straight. "She just made the biggest mistake of her life," I said. Earl picked up his thermos, took a slow sip, and nodded once the nod of a man who believes you. I reached under the counter and pulled open the bottom drawer. Inside, beneath a spare pair of gloves and the folded tide chart, was a composition notebook with a cracked spine and 40 pages of handwritten entries. I had kept it for 14 months. Every transaction, every dollar in and every dollar out. I set it on the counter, smoothed the cover flat with one hand, and opened to the first page. The notebook had a red cover, cheap cardboard, the kind you buy in a 3-pack at a drugstore. Margaret used to tease me about it. She said a man who owned a house on a bluff should at least keep his accounts in something with a leather binding. I told her the numbers inside didn't care about the cover. She laughed and said that was the most Jerry Holt thing I had ever said. I missed her every single day. But I missed her especially on mornings like this one. I turned to the first entry. 14 months ago, September of last year. The handwriting was mine, small, precise, the same way I logged every supplier invoice and every customer tab, going back to 1987. Across the top of the page, I had written one-line amounts given to Brianna, reasons stated at time of request. Earl leaned against the neighboring counter and crossed his arms. He did not rush me. That was one of the things I respected most about the man. He understood that some information needed to be absorbed slowly, the way a cold morning needed to be walked into rather than run at. The first entry was dated September 14th of last year. $400. Reason written in parentheses beside the amount: Ryan's car registration overdue, said DMV would suspend license by Friday. I remembered that morning. Brianna had come by the stall just before the lunch rush, dressed nicely, apologetic in a practiced way. She said Marcus did not know she was asking. She said she hated to bother me. She said it was just this once. It was not just that once. I turned the page. October, 3 entries. $600 for what she called an unexpected dental bill for one of the kids. $800 because the furnace had gone out and the repair company required cash up front. $450 for school supplies and a field trip deposit that supposedly couldn't wait. November 2 entries, December 4. The amounts climbed steadily through the winter months, the way a tide comes in, slowly enough that you don't notice until the water is at your knees. By February, I had loaned, though I never used that word out loud, nearly $9,000. How much so far? Earl asked. Don't rush me, I said, and kept reading. The reasons shifted as the months went on. In the early entries, the excuses were specific. A broken appliance, a missed paycheck, a medical copay that insurance hadn't covered yet. But by spring, the explanations had grown vaguer. Marcus is going through a hard stretch. Things are tight right now. Just need a little help getting through the month. Each time Brianna came alone. Each time she asked me not to mention it to Marcus because she didn't want him to feel like a failure. I had respected that. I had told myself I was protecting my son's pride. Earl read the look on my face and said nothing, which was the right call. By June, the total had crossed $20,000. I turned the pages faster now, not because I was impatient, but because the pattern had locked into place in my mind, and every new entry was simply confirming what I already understood. The amounts never dropped. The reasons never repeated exactly. And Marcus's name appeared in almost every explanation: his car, his job, stress, his bills, his pride. But Marcus himself never once came to ask me for anything. Not once in 14 months. I reached the final entry. 3 weeks ago, $850. Reason utility shutoff notice said Marcus couldn't know or he'd be devastated. I closed the notebook. $47,820, I said. Give or take. Earl let out a long breath through his nose. Not a whistle, not a gasp. Just the slow exhale of a man processing something that confirmed a suspicion he hadn't wanted to have confirmed. In 14 months, he said. In 14 months. And Marcus doesn't know about any of it. I set the notebook on the scale out of habit, then moved it off. Every single reason she gave me involved Marcus in some way. His car, his job, his stress. But she always came alone. Always asked me to keep it between us. Always had a reason why telling him would make things worse. Earl straightened up and looked out toward the water. The morning fog was burning off the surface of the harbor, and the early light was starting to catch the chrome on the boats moored at the far dock. It was a beautiful morning. It kept being a beautiful morning, regardless of what I was reading, which struck me as almost funny. She used his name to open the door, Earl said, and then kept him out of the room. That was exactly right. And the moment Earl said it out loud, the question that followed arrived in my mind with the cold clarity of a fish pulled fresh from 40-degree water. Did Marcus know? Not about the money. I was already certain he didn't know about the money. But the group chat, the accusations, the demand for the house. Did my son know that was coming? Did he sit across from Brianna at the breakfast table this morning while she typed that post and say nothing? Did he read it after she sent it and pick up his coffee cup and go back to the sports page? I needed to know. And there was only one way to find out. I pulled off both rubber gloves, folded them over the edge of the crate, and picked up my phone. I need to make a call, I told Earl. He nodded and turned back to his own stall, giving me the privacy of a man who knew exactly what kind of call it was going to be. I found Marcus in my contacts. His name sat there on the screen, plain, unchanged, the same listing I had called on his birthdays, and on nights I couldn't sleep, and on the afternoon his mother died. I pressed the green button and listened to it ring. It rang 4 times before he picked up. Dad. Marcus's voice was cautious in the way it always got when he already knew a conversation was coming, but hadn't figured out how to prepare for it. He was 40 years old, and he still had that a half-second pause before he said anything, like a man checking his footing before stepping onto uncertain ground. Morning, I said. You eat breakfast yet? Yeah, just finished. Another pause. You're up early. I'm always up early. You know that. I leaned against the side of the delivery truck, and looked out at the harbor. Two pelicans were working the far end of the dock, diving in long, slow arcs. A sport fishing boat was easing out past the breakwater. Everything about the morning was ordinary. I wanted to keep my voice that same way. Ordinary, unhurried, the way I sounded when I called to ask about the weather or remind him about a family birthday. "How's the truck running?" I asked. "Fine," he said. "Why, just asking. I thought Brianna mentioned something a while back about the transmission giving you trouble. Said you needed it looked at before winter." A beat of silence. Not the cautious kind from the beginning of the call. This one was different, the silence of a man running a quick search through his memory and coming up empty. "The transmission's fine, Dad. It's always been fine." I kept my voice easy. "Huh. Must have misheard her. What about the registration? She mentioned once that it had lapsed, and you were worried about getting pulled over." "My registration is current." His voice shifted slightly, not defensive, yet just alert, the way a person gets when a conversation starts moving in a direction they don't recognize. "Dad, what's going on?" Nothing. I'm just making conversation." I let that sit for a second. "She also said back in the spring that your furnace went out. Said the repair company wanted cash, and it caught you guys short that week." This time the silence stretched longer. When Marcus spoke again, something careful had come into his voice, not confusion anymore, but the dawning awareness of a man who is starting to understand that two separate versions of his life exist, and he has only ever been shown one of them. "Our furnace has never gone out," he said quietly. "I see," I said. "Dad." His voice tightened. "What did she tell you?" I did not answer that directly. Instead, I said, "How's work been? You still on the day shift at the warehouse?" "Yeah, same schedule." He exhaled hard through his nose, a sound I recognized from when he was a teenager, and knew he was being handled but couldn't figure out the angle yet. "Dad, I saw the group chat this morning. I know what she posted." There it was. "You read it," I said. "I read it." A long pause. "I'm sorry you had to see that. It shouldn't have gone out like that," I told her. He stopped himself. "You told her what Marcus—" He didn't answer. In 40 years of knowing my son, I had learned that the things he refused to finish were usually more important than the things he said out loud. He had started a sentence that ended with him admitting he knew the post was coming. He had caught himself before the words cleared his teeth, but the shape of the sentence was already in the air between us. "I want to ask you something," I said, "and I need you to answer me straight." "Okay." "Did you know she was going to post that this morning?" The pause that followed was the longest one of the call. It lasted exactly long enough to be its own answer. When a man who loves you hears a question like that, he says no immediately. The denial comes before thought. The way your hand pulls back from a hot stove before your brain registers the heat. Marcus did not say no immediately. Marcus measured his words the way a man measures lumber he's not sure is quite long enough. "It's complicated, Dad. It's a yes or no question, son. I know I just think you need to hear Brianna's side of things. She's been under a lot of stress and Marcus." I said his name the same way I had said it when he was 12 and broke the neighbor's window with a baseball and tried to tell me it was an accident when I'd watched him wind up and throw. "Did you know?" Another long silence. Then barely above a murmur, "She said she was going to handle it her way. I told her to slow down. She didn't listen to me, Dad. She never listens." That was as close to a yes as I was going to get. I breathed in through my nose and looked out at the water. The pelicans had moved on. The sport fishing boat was a small shape now against the flat gray line where the ocean met the morning sky. "I love you," I told him. "I want you to know that hasn't changed." "Dad, I'll talk to you soon." I ended the call before he could say anything else because there was nothing else I needed to hear from him right now, and nothing I could say that would improve the situation. I stood there holding the phone for a moment. Then I walked back to my counter, picked up my notebook, and slid it into my jacket pocket. Earl was watching me from his stall. He raised his eyebrows a fraction of an inch, his version of asking a question. "He knew," I said. Earl nodded slowly, the way you nod when you were hoping to be wrong about something, and weren't. He picked up his thermos, took a sip, and set it back down. "So what's next?" he asked. I thought about the number in the notebook. Nearly $48,000 taken in small, careful increments over 14 months. I thought about a furnace that had never broken down, and a car registration that was perfectly current, and a transmission that had never given anyone any trouble at all. Someone had spent that money, and it was not on Marcus. "I need to find out where it went," I said. I finished the morning shift at the stall by 11:30, handed the float money to my part-time helper, and drove north on Coastal Highway toward the Meridian Shopping Center. Brianna's furniture store, she called it Callaway Interiors, a name she had chosen herself because she said it sounded established, had been operating out of a ground-floor unit near the center's main entrance for just over 2 years. I had been there exactly once, about 18 months ago, when she hosted a soft opening and sent invitations to the whole family. The space had been done up nicely. Track lighting, white walls, a few expensive-looking sofas arranged on area rugs. Brianna had stood near the entrance in a blazer, shaking hands and handing out business cards, looking every bit the successful entrepreneur she had always wanted people to believe she was. I had told her the place looked good. I had meant it at the time. I turned into the shopping center lot and drove slowly toward the main entrance. I spotted the unit from 40 feet away. There was no need to park and walk closer to understand what I was looking at, but I parked anyway, because I wanted to be certain. The storefront was empty. Not closed for the weekend, not dark for the holiday, empty in the way that a space becomes empty, when everything that once filled it has been removed, and no plans exist to fill it again. The display windows that had once held a leather sectional and a glass coffee table were bare from floor to ceiling. The decal lettering that had spelled out Callaway Interiors across the top of the glass had been scraped off, leaving a faint ghost of adhesive residue in the shape of letters that no longer wanted to be read. A single sheet of paper was taped to the inside of the door, a notice from the property management company too far away to read in full, but close enough to recognize the format. I got out of the truck and walked up to the glass anyway. The notice was dated 9 weeks ago. It was a standard California commercial lease termination document, the kind issued when a tenant vacates a space before the lease term ends and the landlord reclaims the unit. At the bottom, in smaller print, was a line about security deposit forfeiture due to property damage. A man in a gray polo shirt came out of the unit next door, a shipping and printing place, and looked at me looking at the notice. "You interested in the space?" he asked. "No," I said. I knew the woman who ran the store here. He made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "The furniture place, yeah." He leaned against the door frame and crossed his arms. "She cleared out fast. Middle of August. Came in one morning, had 2 guys with a van, and by noon the place was stripped. Didn't even say goodbye to anybody over here. Just gone." "Did you know her well?" I asked. "Well enough to say good morning. She seemed fine at first. Real polished, always had a good story. But the last few months before she left, the lights were off more than they were on. I figured things weren't going great. He shrugged. Her business partner stopped coming around back in the spring. After that, it was just her, and then it was nobody. I thanked him and walked back to my truck. I sat in the cab for a moment with the engine off. The math was not complicated, but I needed to let it settle before I drove anywhere. Brianna had borrowed $47,820 from me over 14 months. She had borrowed $180,000 from her mother, a figure I did not yet know but would learn soon enough. The storefront had been emptied in August. The business partner had disappeared in the spring. The lease had been terminated early, the deposit forfeited, the sign scraped from the window. All of that money was gone. And now she needed a $2.6 million house. A man does not need a $2.6 million house because a small business failed. A failed business leaves you embarrassed and broke and looking for a fresh start. A failed business does not require you to manufacture a family crisis, post lies to 43 relatives on a Saturday morning, and give a 68-year-old man 5 days to sign away his home. There was more. There had to be more. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I glanced at it. A text from my Uncle Roy, one of the 43 people in the family chat, asking if I was all right, and whether any of what Brianna had posted was actually true. I did not answer him yet. I set the phone face down and started the engine. I needed to talk to someone who actually knew what had happened inside that storefront. Someone who had been close to the operation, who had watched it from the beginning, who might know where the money had really gone and why Brianna's business partner had stopped showing up in the spring. I thought about who that person might be. And then I remembered something Earl had said to me once months ago on a slow Tuesday morning when the market was quiet. He had mentioned a woman he had seen sitting alone at the far end of the dock, crying in that particular way people cry when they think no one is watching. He had not known who she was at the time, but he had recognized her face later, the woman who ran the breakfast counter on the south side of the marina. Brianna's mother. I had met Dorothy Calloway exactly 3 times in 5 years. She was a small, quiet woman who made very good biscuits and never seemed entirely comfortable in her daughter's presence. I had not thought much of it at the time. Some people were just like that around family. I pulled out of the shopping center lot and pointed the truck south toward the marina. The breakfast counter on the south side of the marina did not have a name on the sign out front. It just said "Open" in red letters on a hand-painted board with a smaller line underneath that read, "Hot coffee all day." The kind of place that does not need a name because the people who know about it have been coming long enough that the name stopped mattering. I pulled into the gravel lot beside it at noon. Through the front window, I could see a woman moving behind the counter, wiping down the coffee station with a white rag. She was small-framed, somewhere in her early 60s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back from her face and the efficient, unhurried movements of someone who had been working a counter since before I started selling fish. Dorothy Calloway. To anyone who had known her more than 10 minutes, I had met her 3 times in 5 years. Once at Marcus and Brianna's wedding, where she had sat quietly at the family table and smiled at the right moments and said very little. Once at a Christmas dinner 2 years ago, where she had brought a sweet potato casserole and spent most of the evening in the kitchen helping with dishes. And once at the marina market briefly, when I was picking up supplies and she was buying coffee grounds from Earl's neighbor. Each time she had been pleasant and self-contained and slightly careful, the way a person gets when they have learned that saying too much in certain company carries a cost. The bell above the door jangled when I pushed it open. Dot looked up from the counter. For a half-second something moved across her face, not quite surprise, not quite relief, but something in between, like a woman who had been waiting for a particular knock on a particular door and was not entirely sure whether to be glad it had finally come. Mr. Holt, she said. Jerry, I told her. Please. She set down her rag and gestured to the stool at the end of the counter nearest the window. Sit down. You want coffee? Thank you. Yes. She poured without asking how I took it, which told me she remembered from somewhere. She set the mug in front of me and then stood on the other side of the counter with both hands flat on the surface, looking at me steadily. I saw what she posted this morning, Dot said. She did not soften it or work up to it. She just said it the way you say a fact that has been sitting in the room with you for hours. I want you to know that I am deeply sorry. What she did was wrong. What she has been doing for a long time has been wrong. I wrapped both hands around the mug. The coffee was strong and hot and exactly what I needed. I'm not here to put you in the middle of anything, I said. But I need to understand what happened. I found the storefront today. It's been empty since August. Dot's jaw tightened. She looked down at her hands for a moment, then back up at me. How much did she take from you? The question landed without warning. I had not expected her to open with that. Close to 48,000, I said. Over 14 months, Dot closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were wet at the corners, but her voice stayed level, the composure of a woman who had been absorbing blows for long enough that her face had learned to stay still, even when the rest of her was not. She took 180,000 from me, she said. About 14 months ago. She came to me crying, said the business needed a cash injection to get through a rough quarter, promised she'd pay it back in 90 days. Dot laughed, a short, dry sound with no humor in it. That was the retirement money. Mine and my late husband's both. 40 years of putting money away a little at a time. I did not say anything. There was nothing to say that would be adequate, so I said nothing and let her continue. Jack, I sold the car, Dot said. I cut back on everything. I've been working 6 days a week since spring just to keep this place running and cover my own bills. She picked up her rag again, not to use it, just to have something in her hands. I kept telling myself she would come through, that it was just taking longer than she said. But then I heard nothing for weeks at a time, and when I did hear from her, she always had a reason, always had an explanation, and every explanation sounded just reasonable enough that I wanted to believe it. She pressed the rag against the counter and held it there. I know that feeling, I said. Dot looked at me across the counter. Her eyes were dry now. Something harder had taken the place of the tears, not anger exactly, but the particular resolve of a woman who has spent too long being patient and has finally found the bottom of it. There's something else, she said. Something I should have told someone a long time ago. She reached under the counter and brought out a phone. It was older, a model 2 or 3 generations back, the screen slightly scratched, the case cracked along one corner. She held it in both hands for a moment without unlocking it. She sent me a voice message, Dot said. 7 months ago. She was asking for more money, and in the message she said something she probably didn't realize she was saying out loud. She pressed play. Brianna's voice came through the small speaker clear enough that every word landed without effort. Mom, I just need you to help me one more time. If we can just get the house in Ryan's name, everything gets fixed. Everything goes away. Just help me get the house, and I'll take care of the rest. The message ended. The counter was very quiet. Ryan, I said. She calls Marcus that sometimes. His middle name. I know, Dot said. She's called him that since they started dating. I looked at the phone in Dot's hands. 7 months ago. Whatever story Brianna had been telling the family about a confused old man who had recently started losing his grip, that story had not existed yet 7 months ago. which meant she had been planning to take my house before she had invented a reason why I deserved to lose it. "Can I get a copy of that message?" I asked. Dot held the phone out across the counter without hesitation. I took the phone from Dot's hand and pressed play a second time. I wanted to hear it again without the shock of the first listen. The first time a thing hits you, your brain spends half its energy on the impact and only half on the actual information. The second time you hear clearly. Brianna's voice came through the scratched speaker with the particular intimacy of a voice message, unscripted, slightly rushed, the way people sound when they are talking to someone they believe is entirely on their side. The words were the same ones I had heard 30 seconds ago, but the second time I heard what was underneath them: the slight breathlessness, the speed, the way she said everything gets fixed with the emphasis on fixed, like a woman describing a solution she had already decided on, rather than a request she was still making. She had not been asking her mother for help. She had been assuming it. I listened to it a third time. Then I set the phone on the counter and looked at the date stamp above the message. April 19th, 7 months and 3 days ago. At that point, I said slowly, "Had she said anything to you about my health, my memory, anything like that?" Dot shook her head without hesitation. "Nothing. Not a word. As far as I knew, you were perfectly fine. You are perfectly fine." She said the last part with a firmness that made it clear she had thought about this, already had worked through the timeline herself, and had arrived at the same place I was arriving now. The story about the confused, volatile old man who could no longer manage his own affairs, that story did not exist in April. It had been written later, after the house plan was already in motion, assembled from nothing, because a reason was needed, and Brianna was willing to build one from scratch. I pulled out my own phone. "I'm going to airdrop this to myself," I said. "Is that all right?" "Take whatever you need," Dot said. "In California, a person who receives a voice message owns that recording." Dot had every legal right to share it, copy it, and hand it to anyone she chose. I was not a law enforcement officer, and I was not building a criminal case. I was a 68-year-old man trying to understand what had been done to him and by whom. The message transferred to my phone in 4 seconds. I set both phones on the counter and looked at Dot. She had refilled my coffee without being asked, and she was standing with her arms crossed now. Not in a defensive way, but in the way of a woman who has made a decision she is not going to unmake. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Go ahead." "Why did you keep it, the message? 7 months is a long time to hold on to something like that and not act on it." Dot was quiet for a moment. She looked out the window at the marina, at the boats and the flat gray water and the line of pelicans working the surface near the far dock. When she looked back at me, her eyes were dry, but the skin around them was tight. "Because she's my daughter," she said. "Because I kept telling myself she would figure out a way to fix it on her own. That she would come to me and say she was sorry, and that would be the beginning of something better." She pressed her lips together. "I have been waiting for that conversation my entire life, Jerry. It has never come, and I am done waiting for it." I nodded. There was nothing to argue with in that, and I did not try. I picked up my phone and listened to the message one more time this time, paying attention, not just to the words, but to the sound underneath the words, the slight breathlessness, the speed of the delivery. The way Brianna said, "Everything gets fixed," with the emphasis on fixed, like a woman who was describing a solution rather than a request. She had known exactly what she wanted. She had known exactly how to frame it. She had called her own mother and used the language of reassurance. Everything goes away. I'll take care of the rest. The way you use it on someone whose cooperation you are confident of, whose objections you have already decided do not matter. There's something else I need to check, I told Dot. A stack of paperwork Brianna brought me a few weeks ago. She said it was a co-signing document for a business loan for Marcus. I didn't sign it, but I want someone to look at it properly before Friday. Dot's eyes sharpened. What kind of paperwork? I don't know exactly. That's the problem. I folded a paper napkin on the counter, a habit I had when I was thinking through something. Earl Dixon has been reading contracts longer than either of us. I'm going to take it to him tonight. Earl from the vegetable stall, Dot asked. 31 years next to me, I said. He once caught a billing error in a supplier contract that saved me $4,000. He reads fine print the way most people read headlines. Dot almost smiled at that. It did not quite make it all the way to her face, but it came close, the expression of a woman remembering what it felt like to find something mildly funny, testing whether that feeling still worked. You have a plan, she said. It was not a question. I'm working on one, I said. I stood up from the stool and pulled $2 from my pocket for the coffee. Dot waved it off, and I left it on the counter anyway, because that is how I was raised. I picked up my phone and headed for the door. Jerry. Dot's voice stopped me with my hand on the handle. I turned around. Her arms were still crossed, but her chin was up now, and the expression on her face had moved past grief and past apology into something quieter and considerably more dangerous. Whatever you're planning for Friday, she said, I want you to know that I will not be protecting her this time. I held her gaze for a moment. I know, I said. That's why I came to you first. I pushed the door open and walked out into the cold afternoon air, the voice message saved on my phone, and the total damage running in my head, like a register that would not stop. Nearly $228,000 between the two of us. Gone. And Earl was going to want to see that paperwork tonight. Earl Dixon lived 4 blocks from the marina in a house he had owned since 1998, a single-story craftsman with a vegetable garden in the back, and a porch light that stayed on until he went to bed. I had been inside that house maybe 30 times over the years, for football games, for the occasional dinner, after a long market day, for the afternoon Margaret passed, and I did not want to be alone in my own kitchen. Earl's house was the kind of place that felt the same every time you walked into it, which was exactly what I needed on a night like this one. He met me at the door before I knocked, which meant he had seen my headlights pull up. He was still in his work clothes, canvas pants, flannel shirt, the same steel-toed boots he wore to the market, and he had a mug of decaf in his hand that he had clearly just poured. Come in, he said. I put the kitchen light on. I sat at the kitchen table and pulled the papers from the manila envelope Brianna had given me 11 days ago. She had handed them across my kitchen counter on a Wednesday morning casual as a grocery list, and told me it was a co-signing document for a small business loan Marcus was taking out to expand his warehouse management responsibilities into an independent contracting position. She said the bank just needed a family member's signature as a character witness. She said it was standard. She said it would take 30 seconds. I had not signed it. Something about the thickness of the envelope had bothered me. Too many pages for 30 seconds, and I had told her I wanted to read it first. She had smiled and said, of course, no rush, and left. She had not mentioned it again, which bothered me more than the envelope had. I spread the pages across Earl's kitchen table. 14 pages total. Earl pulled his reading glasses from his shirt pocket, sat down across from me, and picked up the first page without a word. He read the way he did everything steadily, without hurrying, without performing. I watched his face. Pages 1 through 3 were standard enough. Borrower information, loan purpose, repayment terms for a figure of $80,000 attributed to Marcus Holt, listed as an independent contractor. Page 4 was a personal financial disclosure form. Page 5 was a credit authorization. Page 6 was a signature page for Marcus with 3 signature lines and a notary block. Earl turned to page 7. He stopped. His right hand, which had been moving steadily across the page as he read, went completely still. He reached up and adjusted his glasses. He read the page again from the top. Then he set it flat on the table and pressed 2 fingers against a paragraph in the middle of the page, about 2/3 of the way down. "Earl," I said, "hold on." He read it a 3rd time. Then he looked up at me over the top of his glasses with an expression I had never seen on his face before in 31 years. Not anger, not alarm exactly, but the particular sobriety of a man who has just found something in a document that should not be there and understands precisely what it means. "This is not a co-signing document," he said. "What is it?" He turned the page around and slid it across the table to face me. His finger was still on the paragraph. "This is a durable power of attorney clause embedded inside a loan co-signature packet. Right here in this paragraph, if you had signed on page 6, you would have been authorizing Brianna Holt to act as your legal representative in all real estate transactions in the event that you are determined to be. And I'm reading this exactly unable to make independent financial decisions due to cognitive or physical incapacity." I looked at the paragraph. The language was dense and technical, the kind of prose that was designed to be skimmed, rather than read surrounded on all sides by the ordinary language of a loan document, so that it sat camouflaged in plain sight. "In California," Earl continued, "any power of attorney that covers real estate has to be executed as a completely separate document. It has to be notarized on its own with independent witnesses, and the person granting the power has to sign a specific acknowledgement that they understand what they are giving away. You cannot bury it inside another contract and collect a signature that way. It is not enforceable." He paused. "But she didn't know that you knew that. She was counting on you not reading page 7. I sat back in my chair. The room was quiet, except for the refrigerator's low hum and the distant sound of the marina, the creak of dock lines, and the soft percussion of water against hulls. I had lived near that sound my whole adult life, and I rarely noticed it anymore. Tonight I noticed it. "She needed 2 things from me," I said. "The house signed over voluntarily if I agreed, and a legal mechanism to take it anyway if I didn't." I looked at the page 7 still facing me on the table. This was her backup plan. "That's how I read it," Earl said. He took a long sip of his decaf. "Jerry, I have to ask you something directly." "Go ahead." "How many other documents has she put in front of you in the last year? Anything you signed without reading the whole thing?" The question hit harder than I expected. I thought back carefully: supplier invoices, a marina parking permit renewal, a birthday card for Marcus that Brianna had already filled out and asked me to sign at the bottom. Nothing with real estate language, nothing with my address on it. I was almost certain. Almost. "I don't think so," I said. "But I'm going to check." Earl nodded and refilled his mug from the carafe on the counter. "You want to tell me what you're planning for Friday?" I looked at the 14 pages spread across his table, the loan document, the buried clause, the signature line I had never touched. "Not yet," I said. "But I need to check one more thing tomorrow. The camera on my front door. Marcus had given me the doorbell camera 2 Christmases ago, which would have been December of 2023. He installed it himself on a Sunday afternoon, standing on the small stepladder I kept in the garage, drilling the mount into the wood above the front door frame, while I handed him tools from below. It took about an hour. When he finished, he showed me the app on my phone, how to pull up the live feed, how to scroll back through recorded footage, how to set motion alerts. He seemed pleased with himself the way he always did when he solved a practical problem. I had thanked him and meant it. I thought about that Sunday afternoon now as I carried my laptop to the kitchen table and pulled up the cloud archive. The system stored 90 days of footage automatically organized by date and sorted by motion events. I scrolled back to the correct date without difficulty. The night in question was 3 weeks ago, a Tuesday, the first week of November, the night Brianna had claimed I screamed at her and Marcus and threw them out of my house in a rage. I remembered that evening clearly. I had made dinner for the three of us, a pot of chili I had started in the afternoon, cornbread from a mix Margaret used to keep in the pantry, a 6-pack of whatever lager Marcus liked. It had been an ordinary evening. We ate at the kitchen table. Marcus talked about his job. Brianna was quieter than usual, which I had noticed but not thought much about. After dinner, she brought up the house. Not for the first time, she had been raising the subject in small ways for months, always framed as concern for my future, always ending with some version of the suggestion that it would make everyone feel better if the property were in Marcus's name. That night, she had pushed harder than before. I had told her no clearly and without anger, and asked her to let the subject go. She had not let it go. The conversation had gotten uncomfortable. Eventually, I had asked them both to leave, which they did, and I had locked the door and gone to bed. That was what I remembered. I wanted to see what the camera remembered. I clicked on the motion event, time-stamped 11:14 p.m. The footage was clear. The porch light was on, which meant the image was sharp and well lit, not the grainy green of night vision. The camera angle covered the front door, the porch, the top 2 steps, and a slice of the driveway beyond. I watched myself appear in the doorway. I was wearing the gray cardigan Margaret had given me 4 years ago, and the dark slacks I kept for when company came. I was standing in the doorway with one hand on the doorframe. My body language was calm, both feet planted, no raised hands, no forward lean. I looked like a man holding a door open, which is exactly what I was doing. Brianna came into frame from the left side of the porch. She stopped about 6 feet from me. Then she turned her face slightly away from me and toward the driveway, and she screamed, "Not at me. Not toward me." She angled her body away from this door and screamed into the night air loud enough that the camera's audio clipped slightly at the peak. "Don't touch me. Do not put your hands on me." I watched my own figure in the doorway. I had not moved. My hand was still on the doorframe. The distance between us had not changed by an inch. Marcus appeared at the bottom of the porch steps coming up from the driveway. He stopped when Brianna screamed. He looked at her. He looked at me. He was close enough to see exactly what I could see, which was nothing, no contact, no aggression, no movement from my direction at all. Then Brianna walked down the 2 steps and stopped beside Marcus. She put her hand on his arm and turned her back to the door, and she spoke to him in a voice that was lower, but still clearly picked up by the microphone. "Just let me handle this," she said. "If he won't sign, I'll make the whole family think he's lost his mind." Marcus did not say anything. He looked at the ground for a moment. Then he looked back up at the door at me and gave a single small nod. Not agreement exactly. Not protest either. The nod of a man who has just been told the plan and has decided that his silence is sufficient participation. The timestamp on that exchange read 11:16 p.m. The motion event ended at 11:17. 45 seconds of footage. 45 seconds that contained everything. I sat at the kitchen table and did not move for a long time. The laptop screen dimmed and then went dark on its sleep timer, and I did not wake it. I sat in the dark kitchen with the sound of the ocean coming through the window I had left open 2 inches, the same window I had left open every night for 40 years because Margaret said she slept better with fresh air. I had expected the footage of Brianna to make me angry. It did not. What she had done was cold and calculated and deliberate, and watching it confirmed every conclusion I had already reached. And in a strange way, confirmation is quieter than suspicion. Suspicion is loud. It keeps you up at night. Certainty is different. Certainty sits down. What made me feel something I had not expected to feel, something that moved through my chest, the way cold water moves slow and total, was the nod. Marcus had known. Marcus had stood 6 feet from his father and watched his wife announce her intention to destroy his father's reputation, and had nodded. Not because Brianna had forced him, not because he had no choice, because he wanted the house on the bluff, and the wanting had turned out to be larger than everything else. I reached out and opened the laptop. I saved the clip to my desktop and copied it to my phone. Then I sat back and looked at the dark window above the sink, and I thought about the man Marcus used to be before that wanting took hold of him, and I let myself feel the full weight of it for exactly as long as it deserved. Then I picked up my phone to check for missed calls. She had called at 4:17 that afternoon and left a voicemail. Her message was 6 words long. "Jerry, please call me back today." I called Sandra Miller back at 7 the next morning, standing at the kitchen counter with a cup of coffee I had not yet touched. Sandra had worked the same branch of Pacific Coast Savings on Harbor Boulevard for 15 years. She was one of those bank employees who remembered faces and account numbers with equal ease, the kind of person who made a point of learning your name on the 2nd visit, so she never had to ask again on the 3rd. Margaret had liked her immediately, which in my experience was a reliable indicator of character. After Margaret passed, Sandra had sent a handwritten card to the house. Not a form letter. A handwritten card, 3 sentences that said she was sorry and that Margaret had always brightened her Tuesday mornings. I had kept it in the drawer of my nightstand, and I had never told anyone that. She picked up on the first ring. "Jerry." Her voice was careful in a way that bank voices rarely were during business hours. Not the careful of someone reading from a script, the careful of someone who had been thinking about how to say something since the previous afternoon. "Thank you for calling me back. I want to ask you something directly, and I need you to tell me if I'm overstepping." "You're not overstepping," I said. "Go ahead." "Yesterday morning, I had a request come across my desk for a full account information inquiry on your accounts here, checking savings and your safety deposit box registration. The request came through a third-party financial representative authorization form." She paused. "The signature on that authorization form was yours. But Jerry, I have your signature on file going back 11 years, and something about it looked wrong to me. I did not process the request. I flagged it for internal review, and then I called you." I set my coffee cup down on the counter. "Who submitted the form?" I asked. "The authorization listed a financial management firm I'm not familiar with. The contact number went to a voicemail that wasn't set up." Another pause. "Jerry, I have to ask, did you authorize anyone to access your account information in the last 2 weeks?" "No," I said. "I did not." The line was quiet for a moment. Then Sandra said in a voice that had moved past careful into something more like resolved, "I'm going to escalate this to our fraud department today. They'll contact you directly, probably by end of business. In the meantime, I'd strongly recommend you check any financial accounts you hold outside of this bank, investment accounts, insurance policies, anything with a beneficiary designation." beneficiary designation. The phrase landed with a weight I felt in my back teeth. I thanked Sandra, told her I appreciated what she had done, and ended the call. Then I stood at the kitchen counter for exactly 30 seconds. Then I went to the filing cabinet in the hallway. I had held a life insurance policy with Coastal Pacific Life for 22 years. $400,000 taken out when Marcus was 18, and I had started thinking seriously about what I would leave behind. For the first 12 years, Margaret had been the primary beneficiary. After she passed, I had updated the policy myself in person at the Coastal Pacific office on Seacliff Drive, and I had designated the beneficiary as the Harbor Light Community Foundation, a local organization that ran after-school programs in the Marina District, a cause Margaret had volunteered for every summer until she got sick. I found the policy folder and pulled out the most recent annual statement. The beneficiary line read Marcus Holt. I read it twice. Then I called Coastal Pacific Life directly. The customer service representative, a young man who introduced himself as Derek, confirmed that a beneficiary change request had been processed 6 weeks ago. The change had been submitted by mail with a completed change of beneficiary form and what appeared to be my signature. Derek read me the date of receipt, the date of processing, and the new beneficiary name. Marcus Holt. Primary. 100%. Derek, I said, keeping my voice level the way I kept it level at the market when a supplier tried to short me on weight. I did not submit that form. I did not sign that document. I need to know the procedure for disputing a fraudulent beneficiary change. Derek's tone shifted immediately, the shift that happens when a customer service call becomes something that requires a supervisor. He put me on hold for 4 minutes. A woman named Patricia came on the line, identified herself as the policy services manager, and walked me through the dispute process in the methodical way of someone who had done it before and understood its seriousness. I would need to submit a written dispute with a sample of my verified signature. Coastal Pacific would freeze the beneficiary designation pending investigation. If the signature was confirmed as fraudulent, the change would be reversed and the matter referred to their legal department. I wrote down everything Patricia told me the same way I wrote down supplier prices in the small, precise handwriting Margaret had called my fisherman's shorthand. When I hung up, I stood in the hallway with the policy folder in my hand and thought about Marcus. Not Brianna this time. Marcus. The beneficiary form had been submitted by mail 6 weeks ago. Brianna did not know my handwriting well enough to forge it. Convincingly, I was certain of that, the same way Sandra had been certain when she flagged the account authorization. Marcus had grown up watching me sign checks, sign invoices, sign birthday cards. He knew the exact pressure and angle of my signature in a way Brianna never could. Marcus had done this himself. Quietly through the mail 6 weeks before, his wife posted her accusations to the family group chat. He had done it while eating dinner at my table and asking how the fishing season was going and telling me he was glad I was staying active. I put the folder back in the cabinet and closed the drawer. I needed to make one more call before Friday. I needed to call Marcus, not to confront him, not yet, but to confirm he was coming to the dinner Brianna had organized, to let him hear my voice and believe that I did not know what I knew. I needed him seated at that table on Friday night, with the full confidence of a man who believed his plan was still intact. I picked up the phone and dialed. Marcus answered on the second ring, and the sound of his voice doing its best impression of ordinary broke something in me that I did not show. "Hey, Dad, everything okay?" "Fine," I said. "Just wanted to make sure you'd be at your aunt's place Friday night." "Yeah," he said. "We'll be there." "Good," I said. "Me too." I spent the rest of that Thursday morning at the stall selling fish and saying good morning to the same people I had said good morning to for 40 years, and I did not think about Friday once. That was a discipline I had learned from the water. When a storm is coming, you do not spend the day before staring at the horizon. You check your lines, you secure what needs securing, and you do the work in front of you. The storm arrives when it arrives. By 2 in the afternoon, the stall was closed, and the cleanup was done, and I drove home and sat at the kitchen table with everything spread out in front of me. The composition notebook with the 14 months of entries, printed screenshots of the bank statements showing $47,820 moved out of the business account in increments, each one dated, each one traceable. The voice message from Dot's phone saved to my own and copied to a thumb drive I kept in the kitchen drawer. The 14-page loan document with page 7 bookmarked by a strip of yellow tape Earl had stuck there the night before. The notes I had taken during my call with Patricia at Coastal Pacific Life, written in my fisherman's shorthand, on 3 pages of a legal pad. And the clip. 45 seconds saved to my phone and copied to the same thumb drive, clear audio, good light timestamp intact. I looked at everything on the table for a long moment. Then I got up and made a pot of coffee. Earl arrived at 3:30, which was when I had asked him to come. He let himself in through the back door the way he always did and hung his jacket on the hook beside the refrigerator and looked at the table. "That's a lot of paper," he said. "Sit down," I said. "I'll pour." We went through everything together piece by piece in the order I had laid it out. Earl asked questions the way a careful man asks questions, not to show that he was paying attention, but because he genuinely needed the answers to complete the picture. He asked about the timeline of the insurance change relative to the group chat post. He asked whether Sandra Miller had confirmed the account authorization request had come from the same firm listed on the insurance form. He asked whether Dot would be willing to appear somewhere and confirm the voice message was genuine if it came to that. I answered each question as precisely as I could. Yes, the insurance change was 6 weeks before the post. No, Sandra had not yet confirmed a connection between the two firms, but the fraud department was looking. And yes, Dot would confirm anything that needed confirming. I was certain of that. Earl nodded slowly at each answer and said nothing extra. That was one of the things I had always valued about him. He did not fill silence with words that did not need to be there. When we had been through everything, he sat back in his chair and crossed his arms and looked at me across the table. "So what's the plan for tomorrow night?" he asked. "I'm going to let them run," I said. "Brianna has organized this dinner to be a public reckoning. She wants 40-some people in a room watching me sign that deed. She's going to give a performance, and the family is going to pressure me, and she's going to sit at the head of that table feeling like she's already won." I poured the last of the coffee into my mug. "I'm going to let her feel that way for as long as it takes for everyone in that room to be fully committed to her version of events. And then I'm going to send one message to the group chat." Earl looked at the phone on the table. The clip. The clip. The bank statements. The voice message. All of it at once while everyone is sitting there looking at their phones. Earl was quiet for a moment. "You could have sent it already," he said. "You didn't need to wait for the dinner." "I know." "So why wait?" I thought about how to answer that honestly. "Because sending it to an empty room is just information," I said. "Sending it while 40 people are sitting at a table that Brianna set up to humiliate me, that's something else. I want the people who called me a bad father and a selfish old man to be holding their phones when the truth lands. I want there to be no distance between the accusation and the answer." Earl considered that. Then he nodded once, not the slow, deliberate nod of a man still deciding, but the short, firm nod of a man who has decided and is done. "All right," he said. "That makes sense to me." The back door opened, and my sister Patty came in, stomping the cold off her shoes on the mat. Patty was 65, a retired school teacher from Monterey, who had driven up that afternoon when I called her. She had the same dark eyes our mother had, and the same habit of reading a room before she said anything in it. She looked at the table. She looked at me. She looked at Earl. "I made it," she said. "I see that," I said. "Thank you for coming." She sat down at the table and I poured her a coffee, and I told her what I needed from her tomorrow night. Not much, just to be in the room to watch and to forward whatever I sent to the group chat, to every secondary family group she was part of, immediately, without waiting to see how the room reacted first. Patty listened without interrupting, which had always been one of her best qualities as a teacher, and was an even better quality as a sister. When I finished, she said, "You've got it." Then she picked up her coffee mug, looked at the table full of paper, and said quietly, "Mom would have been furious about all of this." "Yes," I said. "She would have." We sat at the kitchen table as the evening came down outside the window, the three of us drinking coffee and not saying much, which was its own kind of preparation. I went to bed at 9:30. I set the alarm for 3:45, the same time I had set it every morning for 40 years. Whatever was going to happen tomorrow was going to happen. I had done everything I could do tonight. Before I reveal how this confrontation ends at the family table, comment "Justice" or drop the number 100 below so I know you're still here with me. Also, please note, the following part includes some fictional elements added for dramatic effect. If this is not the right fit for you, feel free to stop the video right here. But if you're ready, here is how the truth unfolds. I wore the charcoal suit Margaret had bought me for our 35th wedding anniversary. It still fit the same way it had 12 years ago, which was one of the few vanities I allowed myself. I knotted the tie in the bathroom mirror, adjusted the collar once, and drove to my sister Carol's house on Ridgecrest Avenue, arriving at 6:58, 2 minutes before the dinner was supposed to start. Carol was 62, 3 years younger than me, and she had always been the family member most susceptible to a well-told story. She was not a malicious woman. She was a trusting one, which in the wrong hands amounted to the same thing. When I pulled into her driveway, I could already see cars lining both sides of the street for half a block in each direction. Brianna had made sure the turnout was complete. The private dining room Carol had set up in her extended living space held the long folding table she used for Thanksgiving, extended to its full length and surrounded by every chair she owned, plus a dozen borrowed from neighbors. 41 people by my count when I walked in. Cousins I had not seen in 3 years. Aunts and uncles who had driven in from the valley. People whose children I had given graduation money to, and whose names I sometimes had to look up in the family directory Margaret had kept on the refrigerator. They all looked at me when I walked through the door. Brianna was already seated at the far end of the table. She had dressed carefully, a dark blouse, pearl earrings, the composed expression of a woman who had rehearsed this moment. Beside her sat Marcus. His jacket buttoned his eyes on the tablecloth. At the near end, where I was apparently meant to sit, there was an empty chair with a manila folder placed directly in front of it, and a silver pen laid across the top of the folder at a precise diagonal. The property transfer deed ready for my signature. I sat down. I did not look at the folder. I looked at the room. My cousin Dennis, who sold insurance in Fresno and had posted 3 consecutive messages calling me heartless after Brianna's Saturday morning post, was sitting directly across from me. He met my eyes and then looked away first. My Uncle Roy, who was 74 and had been my father's closest brother and who I had once believed would never take a side against me in anything, was seated 2 chairs down from Dennis, with his arms folded and his jaw set in the way that meant he had already decided. Patty was near the middle of the table on the right side between a cousin named Beth and an aunt named Lorraine. She caught my eye for exactly 1 second and then looked at her water glass. Brianna stood up. She spoke for 11 minutes. I know because I watched the second hand on the wall clock above the sideboard. She described her years of devotion, the drives to doctor appointments. I did not recall needing the meals she claimed to have cooked for me weekly. The emotional burden of watching a man she loved like a father deteriorate before her eyes. Her voice broke twice precisely at the moments of highest rhetorical impact. She said she was not asking for anything she had not earned. She said she had given the best years of her working life to our family. She said she only wanted security. She said Marcus deserved to know that his childhood home would be safe. The room responded the way she had designed it to respond. Uncle Roy unfolded his arms long enough to bang his open palm on the table twice. Dennis shook his head slowly in my direction. A woman named Gail, who was married to a cousin on Margaret's side and barely knew me, said loudly that it was a shame what some people did to their own families. Marcus sat beside his wife and did not speak. He looked at the tablecloth with the concentration of a man trying very hard to be somewhere else. Then Brianna sat down, picked up the silver pen, and held it out toward me across the length of the table. "Dad," she said, and the word landed with the particular wrongness of a word used by someone who has not earned it. "It's time." The room looked at me, all 41 of them, in the sudden silence that follows a performance when the audience is waiting for the last actor to deliver the final line. Uncle Roy said, "Jerry, do the right thing." Dennis said, "Come on, Uncle Jerry. It's not worth the family falling apart over a piece of property." Gail said something under her breath to the woman beside her. I looked at the folder in front of me. I looked at the pen Brianna was still holding out. I looked at Marcus, who had finally lifted his eyes from the tablecloth and was watching me with an expression I had seen on his face exactly once before, the morning after his mother's funeral, when he had come downstairs and found me sitting at the kitchen table at 4 a.m. and had not known what to say. I did not reach for the pen. I did not say a word. I let the silence stretch. 10 seconds. 20. Long enough for the certainty in the room to solidify, for Brianna's small, triumphant smile to settle into place at the corner of her mouth, for Uncle Roy to shift forward in his chair in preparation for another push. Long enough for every person at that table to step fully, completely, and without reservation into the story Brianna had built for them. Then I reached into my jacket pocket and took out my phone. I had sent things to the family group chat hundreds of times over the years. Photos of fish I was particularly proud of. Happy birthday messages with the candle emoji Margaret used to add before I learned how. A video of the harbor seals that had taken up residence on the South Dock one winter, which had gotten more responses than anything I had ever posted before or since. The group chat had always felt like a bulletin board, a place for announcements and pleasantries, and the occasional forwarded joke that someone's grandchild had sent them. This was different. I opened the app. The thread was full of messages from the past week, relatives reacting to Brianna's original post, people chiming in with support for her, a few tentative voices asking questions that had gone unanswered. I scrolled past all of it without reading any of it and went directly to the attachment icon. The room had gone very quiet. Not the silence of people being polite, the silence of 41 people noticing that the man they had spent the last 11 minutes pressuring was doing something unexpected with his phone instead of reaching for the pen. I attached 3 files in sequence. The video clip first, 45 seconds clear audio, good light, timestamp November 4th at 11:14 p.m. Then the image file I had assembled the night before, a side-by-side of 6 bank statements, each one showing a withdrawal made by Brianna from my business account. Each one dated, each one with the stated reason I had written beside it in the notebook, and then typed into the caption. $47,820 laid out in a format that required no interpretation. Then the voice message dots recording 7 months old, Brianna's voice asking her mother to help get the house into Ryan's name so that everything would be fixed. I did not write a caption. I did not add an explanation. The files spoke clearly enough on their own. I pressed send. For 2 seconds, nothing happened. Then the phones started going off, not one at a time. All of them, or nearly all of them, in the overlapping cascade of notification sounds that happens when a group message lands on 41 devices simultaneously, a sound like a flock of birds startled off a wire, chaotic and immediate and impossible to ignore. People look down at their screens the way people always look down at their screens when something unexpected arrives, with the reflexive curiosity that overrides whatever else they were doing. I watched the room change. Dennis, who had been leaning forward in his chair with his arms crossed, and the expression of a man prepared to deliver a lecture, opened the video and held his phone slightly away from his face, the way people do when they are not sure they want to be too close to what they are about to see. Brianna's voice came out of his speaker. "Just let me handle this. If he won't sign, I'll make the whole family think he's lost his mind." Dennis set the phone flat on the table and did not pick it up again for a long time. Uncle Roy had opened the bank statement image. He was zooming in with 2 fingers slowly the way a man zooms in when he wants to make absolutely certain he is reading what he thinks he is reading. His face had gone the color of old concrete. Gail, who had made the comment under her breath earlier, was playing the voice message with her phone pressed to her ear, her other hand flat on the table, her eyes moving to Brianna's face, and then back to the screen, and then back to Brianna's face again. Brianna's phone was on the table in front of her. The notifications hit it the same as everyone else's. She picked it up. She looked at the screen. The video started playing automatically, her own voice, her own words, her own face caught in the clear light of my front porch. And I watched the performance she had been giving for the past 11 minutes come apart, the way a sandcastle comes apart when the tide finds it. Not all at once. In pieces. First the composure in her eyes, then the set of her jaw, then the careful stillness of her hands, which started to tremble against the surface of the table. Marcus had not moved. He was looking at his own phone with both hands wrapped around it, and his elbows on the table, and whatever he was feeling showed nowhere on his face because Marcus had always been better at hiding things than he was at confronting them. Patty stood up. She did not say anything. She picked up her purse, looked at Brianna for exactly 3 seconds with the expression of a woman who has been a school teacher long enough to recognize a lie at 40 paces, and walked toward the door. The sound of her chair pushing back and her heels on Carol's hardwood floor was the first domino. After that, the room began to move. I stood up and straightened my jacket. "I will not be signing anything tonight," I said, and my voice in that room in that silence landed the way a hand lands flat on a counter. Not loud, just final. Not tonight. Not any night. I looked at Marcus one last time. He was still looking at his phone. He did not look up. I walked to the door. Behind me I heard the sound of chairs of people standing, of voices starting up in the particular register that meant the conversation had shifted completely and irrevocably from the one Brianna had planned. By the time I reached the hallway, I could hear Dennis's voice, loud and sharp, asking Brianna a question she was not answering. I did not stay to hear the rest of it. I pushed open Carol's front door and walked out into the cold night air, and the door closed behind me with a sound like the period at the end of a very long sentence. I sat in my truck in Carol's driveway for a while before I started the engine. Not because I was shaken, not because I needed to collect myself. I sat there because the driveway was quiet, and the house behind me was not, and I had spent enough years on the water to know the value of staying still when everything around you is moving fast. Through the living room window, I could see shapes moving, people standing, gesturing, the particular body language of a gathering that has lost its original purpose and is trying to figure out what it is now. My phone was face up on the passenger seat. It had not stopped vibrating since I walked out the door. I picked it up and started reading. Dennis had sent me a direct message. It was 4 sentences long and contained 2 apologies and 1 question. The question being whether there was anything he could do. I did not answer him yet. My Uncle Roy had sent a voice message of his own, which I did not play, but the transcription the app generated was enough. He was sorry he had not known he should have asked more questions before assuming. A cousin named Beth, who had sat beside Patty at the table and said nothing during Brianna's performance, sent a single line, "Uncle Jerry, I am so sorry we didn't listen," and that one I read 3 times for reasons I could not entirely explain. Patty called at 7:43, 12 minutes after I had walked out of the house. "I forwarded everything," she said before I could speak. "All 3 files to every secondary group I'm in. The cousins chat, the aunts and uncles thread, the one Carol started for Margaret's memorial that never got archived. All of it. It went out about 2 minutes after you left." "Thank you," I said. "There are people in that room right now who are furious." Her voice had the particular evenness of a woman describing a fire she has already called the department about. "Not at you. Dennis got loud about 5 minutes ago. He's asking Brianna questions she can't answer, and every time she tries to redirect, he just asks the same question again, louder." Roy left without saying goodbye to anyone. Carol is in the kitchen by herself, and I think she's been crying, which I feel bad about because none of this is her fault. See, none of it is, I agreed. "Marcus is still there," Patty said. "He hasn't moved from his chair. Brianna keeps trying to talk to him, and he keeps looking at the table." A pause. "Jerry, I've known that boy since he was born. He doesn't look angry. He looks like someone who got exactly what they wanted and just found out it wasn't worth what they paid for it." I did not say anything to that. Patty had always been able to see Marcus more clearly than I could, the way people sometimes see children they love, but did not raise with a precision that parents cannot manage. "I'm going to drive home," I said. "Okay. Then, you did good tonight, Jerry. Margaret would have—" She stopped herself. "Drive safe." I set the phone down and started the engine. The drive home along Coastal Highway took 22 minutes in the dark. I kept the radio off. The road was nearly empty and the ocean was invisible to my right, but I could sense it the way I always could at night. The particular quality of the air, the slight salt weight of it, the way the darkness over the water felt different from the darkness over the land. I had driven this road thousands of times. I knew every curve and every intersection and every mile marker by feel. By the time I got home, the group chat had accumulated 67 new messages. I did not read all of them. I read enough to understand the shape of what was happening. Brianna's inner circle, 3 or 4 people who had been particularly vocal in her defense over the previous week, had gone quiet completely. Not the quiet of people waiting to speak. The quiet of people who have realized that speaking further would require defending something that can no longer be defended. The rest of the chat was moving in the other direction, fast and without ambiguity. People who had called me selfish on Saturday morning were now directing that same energy somewhere else entirely. Within the first hour after I left the dinner, 38 of the 41 people in that room had either left Brianna's personal group chat, blocked her on the platform, or sent me a direct message. I know this because Patty tracked it and texted me the count at 9:15 with a precision that reminded me she had once been a math teacher before she moved to English. 3 people had not cut contact. Marcus. Carol, who I suspected was giving herself time to process rather than taking a side. and Dot, whose name I saw still present in the chat thread, which made sense to me in a way I could not yet fully articulate but intended to think about more carefully in the morning. I changed out of the suit and hung it in the closet on the good wooden hanger, and stood in the kitchen in my undershirt and slacks and drank a glass of water at the counter. The house was exactly the same as it had been when I left it 4 hours ago. The files were gone from the kitchen table. I had put them in the filing cabinet before I drove to Carol's. But the table itself was the same table Margaret and I had bought at an estate sale in 1991 for $40, because it had a crack in one leg that I told her I could fix, and I had fixed it, and it had held for 34 years. I was tired in the way you get tired after something you have been preparing for is finally finished. Not the tired of defeat, the tired of completion. I went to bed at 10:15. I did not dream about any of it. I dreamed about the harbor the way I usually did, and the water was calm. In the morning, Dot called. Dot's call came in at 7:22, while I was still in the kitchen with my first cup of coffee and the morning light was just beginning to come through the window over the sink. Her voice was different from the last time I had heard it. 2 days ago at the breakfast counter she had been controlled, measured the grief kept at arm's length by the effort of telling me what I needed to know. This morning the control was still there, but it was thinner the way ice gets thin in the late season, still holding. But you could hear the difference if you listened carefully. "Brianna came here last night," Dot said. "After the dinner. She was here until past midnight. I think you should come over." I was at her door by 8 o'clock, Dot answered before I knocked, which meant she had been watching for my truck. She was wearing the same apron she had on when I first walked into her breakfast counter 2 days ago, which told me she had already been up for hours, and working was how she handled things that needed handling. She held the door open, and I followed her into the small living room off the front hallway. On the coffee table sat a wooden box. It was about the size of a shoebox, made from some dark wood I did not know the name of, with a brass latch on the front that had gone green with age. The lid was open. The box was empty. I looked at it without touching it. "Tell me," I said. Dot sat in the armchair across from the couch and folded her hands in her lap. She had the posture of a woman delivering a report she had already organized in her mind, because organizing it in her mind was the only way she had gotten through the night. "My mother brought that box from Georgia when she came out to California in 1962, Dot said. She had her mother's wedding ring in it, a gold chain her father had given her before he died, a pair of earrings she wore on her own wedding day. Things that did not have a dollar amount attached to them because they were not about dollars." She looked at the box. "When my mother passed, she left it to me. I have had it for 19 years. I kept it in the cedar chest at the foot of my bed, locked with the key on my key ring. I waited. Last spring I had my gallbladder out," Dot continued. 6 weeks of recovery. Brianna offered to check in on the house while I was at my sister's in Stockton. I gave her a spare key to the front door. She pressed her lips together. When I came home, I noticed the cedar chest had been moved slightly. I asked Brianna about it. She said she had cleaned around it. I believed her because I wanted to. She stood up and walked to the window and looked out at the street for a moment, then turned back. "Last week I went to get the box out for a reason I won't go into," she said. "It was still in this chest, still locked. I thought everything was fine. It was only last night after Brianna left that I actually opened it." Her voice stayed steady, but her hands were not. She pressed them flat against the sides of her apron. Every piece was gone. She had taken the jewelry out and relocked the box and put it back in the chest, and I had not noticed for months because I had not opened it. I trusted that if the box was there and the lock was closed, what was inside was safe. The room was quiet. Outside, I could hear a dog barking somewhere down the street and a car starting up, and the ordinary sounds of a Saturday morning in a neighborhood where nothing was supposed to be wrong. When she came here last night, I said, "What did she want?" Dot sat back down. She wanted me to take her in. She said she had nowhere to go, that Marcus was not speaking to her, that everything had fallen apart, and I was the only person she had left. Dot looked at her own hands. She cried the way she has cried since she was 4 years old, completely, with her whole body, the way that used to make me give her whatever she needed to make it stop. And I sat across from her, and I watched her do it, and I felt something I have never felt before when she cried. "What was that?" I asked. "Nothing," Dot said. I felt nothing, and that frightened me more than the crying did, because it meant something in me had finally finished. She looked up at me. I told her she could not stay here. She left at 12:30. I do not know where she went. I looked at the empty box on the coffee table. 19 years Dot had kept it. Her mother's wedding ring, her grandmother's gold chain. Things that did not have a dollar amount because they were not about dollars. Gone because Brianna had held a spare key for 6 weeks and trusted that Dot would not look too closely. "There's a jewelry resale shop on Main Street," I said. "Peterson's. They've been there since the 90s. They keep records of everything they buy, seller ID description, of item date of transaction. It's required by California law for second-hand dealers." Dot nodded slowly. "I know the place. If she sold anything there, they have a record." I paused. "But Dot, whatever you decide to do with that information is your decision, not mine." She looked at me for a long moment. The thin morning light came through the window behind her and caught the silver in her hair and the deep tiredness around her eyes and the set of her jaw, which was not angry and was not grieving and was something past both of those things. "I know," she said. "I've been deciding since midnight." She reached across the coffee table and closed the lid of the empty box with both hands, slowly and deliberately, the way you close something you are not going to open again. Then she stood up and untied her apron. "Come with me to Peterson's," she said. Peterson's Jewelry and Resale had been on the corner of Main Street and Harbor Boulevard since 1991 in the same storefront, with the same green awning that had faded from forest to sage over 3 decades of coastal sun. A hand-lettered sign in the window said, "We buy gold silver estate jewelry," in red letters that had been repainted so many times. The edges were slightly soft. A man named Gary Peterson, the son of the original owner who had taken over the shop in 2008, looked up from behind the glass counter when Dot and I walked in. He was somewhere in his mid-50s with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and the unhurried manner of a man who spent his days looking carefully at small things. Dot told him what she was looking for. She described each piece from memory with the precision of a woman who had spent 19 years opening that box. On particular occasions, her mother's wedding ring, a yellow gold band with a small chip on the interior from a fall-down porch steps in 1971. The chain 18 inches with a clasp her father had repaired himself with a piece of wire that was still there when Dot last held it. The earrings, clip-on white gold, a style that had not been made since the early 60s. Gary listened without interrupting. Then he turned to his computer and typed for about 30 seconds. "I have a transaction from 6 weeks ago," he said. "October 14th. 3 pieces matching that description sold by a woman matching the ID she presented." He turned the monitor slightly so Dot could see the screen. "California law requires us to photograph the seller and the items at point of sale. I have both on file." Dot leaned forward and looked at the screen. She straightened back up after a few seconds. "That's my daughter," she said. Her voice did not waver. "And those are my pieces." Gary nodded slowly. He had clearly been in this position before the particular uncomfortable geometry of a transaction that had seemed straightforward at the time and was now revealing itself as something else. "Mrs. Calloway," he said carefully, "do you have documentation of ownership, original purchase receipts, photographs, appraisal records?" "I have photographs," Dot said. "My husband took pictures of everything in that box in 2003 when we updated our homeowner's insurance. I have the file at home." "Then you have a case," Gary said. "I'd recommend filing a police report before you come back here with the documentation, because that establishes the timeline officially. Once you have the report number, bring it in, and I can provide our transaction records to support it. The items are already sold, they left the store 3 weeks ago, but the records establish what happened and who was responsible." Dot thanked him. She was very calm. The kind of calm that has nothing to do with feeling calm and everything to do with having made a decision so completely that the emotions have not yet caught up with it. We drove back to Dot's house in my truck, without saying much. She went inside and came out 8 minutes later with a manila envelope and her purse. I drove her to the Pelican Cove Police Department on Shoreline Drive, which was 4 blocks from the marina, and where I had once gone to report a supplier theft 15 years ago, and found the process straightforward if unhurried. We were inside for 40 minutes. Dot gave her statement to an officer named Reeves, showed him the insurance photographs on her phone, and signed the theft report. Her hand was steady when she signed it. I sat in the plastic chair beside her and did not say anything because nothing needed to be said. When we came back out into the morning sun, Brianna was sitting on the front steps of Dot's house. She had been there long enough that the cold had gotten into her. Her jacket was pulled tight, and her arms were crossed over her chest, and her eyes were red in the way that follows a night of not sleeping rather than a few minutes of crying. She stood up when she saw Dot's car, my truck, actually pull to the curb. She looked at her mother, and then she looked at me, and then she looked at her mother again. "Mom." Her voice was raw. "Please, can we talk inside?" Dot got out of the truck and walked toward the steps without hurrying. She stopped at the bottom below Brianna and looked up at her daughter. "I went to Peterson's this morning," Dot said. Brianna's face did something complicated. "Mom, I can explain. Gary Peterson has photographs," Dot said. "Of you, of the pieces, dated and time-stamped and filed with his transaction records." She paused. "I have just come from the police department." The color left Brianna's face the way water leaves a glass when you tip it completely and all at once. "Mom." Her voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. "Mom, just tell them you gave them to me. That's all you have to do. Just say that. Just say, yes, you gave them to me and this goes away. One sentence." She reached out and took Dot's hand in both of hers, squeezing hard the way she had done since she was small when she wanted something badly enough. "Please, I have nowhere left to go. One sentence, Mom. Just say yes." Dot looked at her daughter's hands holding hers. She looked at them for a long time. Long enough that I thought she might be about to do it, that the weight of 40 years of motherhood was going to be heavier than everything else. Then Dot gently removed her hands from Brianna's grip. "I have been saying yes to you your entire life," she said, when the right answer was no. "I said yes to the money. I said yes when you needed covering. I said yes every time the truth would have been harder." Her voice was quiet and entirely without anger, which made it more devastating than anger would have been. "I love you. I will always love you. But I am done saying yes." She walked up the steps past her daughter and unlocked the front door and went inside. Brianna stood on the step. She looked at me. I had nothing to give her. I looked back at her the way you look at weather, acknowledging it, not arguing with it. Then I got back in my truck and drove to the marina. I have spent 40 years at the same stall, on the same dock, watching the same water, and one of the things the water teaches you if you pay attention long enough is that some things do not need to be pushed. They fall on their own. You set the conditions correctly, and then you step back and let gravity do what gravity does. A net dropped in the right place at the right time does not need to be forced down. It sinks because that is what nets do. The 3 weeks after the dinner I watched from the dock, the first report came from Patty, who called on the Sunday morning after the dinner and told me that Brianna had tried to post a response to the family group chat and found that she had been removed from it overnight by Carol, who had taken over admin rights and made the change without announcement or explanation. Carol had also sent a personal message to every member of the chat saying she was sorry the dinner had happened the way it happened, and that she hoped people would give me space to process things in my own time. It was a gracious message. I called Carol that afternoon and thanked her, and she cried a little, which I had expected, and I told her none of it was her fault, which was the truth. The second report came from Earl, who heard things at the market the way Earl always heard things, not because he sought them out, but because 31 years in the same location made him a fixed point that information drifted toward naturally. He told me that Brianna had gone to 3 different people in the extended family, asking to stay with them temporarily. All 3 had said no. One of them, a cousin on Marcus's side, whose name I will not use here, had apparently told her directly that he had seen the video and would not be putting his household in the middle of it. Brianna had then, according to Earl, attempted to reach out to 2 former business associates from the furniture store, both of whom had stopped returning her calls months before the dinner and were not about to start again now. Marcus had gone to stay at the warehouse where he worked. His supervisor, a man named Dale, who Marcus had mentioned to me a handful of times over the years, had let him use the break room couch for a few nights, before that became unsustainable. After that, Marcus had found a weekly rental room in a motel on the north end of town, the kind of place with exterior corridors and a vending machine outside every 3rd door. Patty had driven past it once and described it to me without editorializing, which was the kindest thing she could have done. The theft report Dot had filed moved through the system the way these things move, not quickly, not dramatically, but steadily. An officer named Reeves had followed up with Gary Peterson and obtained the transaction records and the photographs. In California, theft of personal property valued above $950 is a felony. The 3 pieces Brianna had taken from that cedar chest: her grandmother's wedding ring, the gold chain, the white gold earrings had been appraised collectively at just over $4,000 when Dot's husband photographed them in 2003. The photographs, the transaction records, and Brianna's own ID on file at Peterson's left. Very little room for argument. Dot called me on a Thursday morning 2 weeks after she had signed the report and told me in the same quiet voice she used for everything that Brianna had been formally charged and taken into custody the previous afternoon. She did not sound relieved. She did not sound devastated. She sounded like a woman who had made the hardest decision of her life and was now simply living on the other side of it. I told her I was sorry it had come to that. She said she was too. Then she said she had biscuits in the oven and needed to get back to them, and we said goodbye, and that was that. What I did know was this: Brianna's debt had not waited for the legal process to catch up with it. The people she owed money to did not care about family group chats or police reports or how things had looked from the outside. They cared about repayment schedules and missed calls and the particular arithmetic of borrowed money that has not been returned. 2 of those creditors had already moved to collections. A third had filed a small claims action against her in county court public record, which Earl had found without looking very hard because he knew where to look and had looked for my sake without being asked. The furniture store, lease termination, the forfeited deposit, the lost business capital, the money from Dot, the money from my stall, the money from the creditors, When you added it together, it was a number that a person could not simply absorb and continue. It was the kind of number that required decisions to be made about what remained. Brianna did not have many things remaining that could be decided about. I did not feel triumphant about any of this. I want to be clear about that. I felt the way you feel when a storm you saw coming on the horizon 3 days out finally arrives and passes through and leaves the water rough and the dock in need of inspection, but the boat's still floating. You feel the relief of accuracy. You feel the fatigue of having been right. You do not feel glad that the storm happened. The dock needed inspection. My business accounts needed a formal separation from any access Brianna had previously been given. Sandra Miller had already handled the account security on her end, but I spent a Wednesday afternoon on the phone with 3 different institutions, making sure every door that could have been left open was properly closed. It was methodical and tedious and necessary, and I did it the same way I did everything one item at a time, completely before moving to the next. On a Thursday evening in the second week of December, Earl brought 2 cups of coffee to my stall at closing time and sat on the upturned crate he used as a chair, and said without preamble that he had heard Marcus had left the weekly rental motel and was not sure where he was staying now. I nodded. I had heard the same thing from Patty 2 days before. "You think he'll come to you?" Earl asked. I looked out at the harbor. The winter light was going early now, the sun dropping behind the hills to the west before 5 o'clock, and leaving the water a flat gray that was not unpleasant if you had spent enough time looking at it. "Yes," I said. "I think he will. And when he does," I picked up my coffee. It was still hot, which Earl always managed somehow, regardless of how long the walk from the machine was. "I'll know what to say," I said. Earl nodded, and we drank our coffee in the way 2 old men drink coffee at the end of a long day, without needing to fill the space between them with anything that was not already there. 3 days later, at 4 in the morning, I looked up from the crates and saw a figure standing at the far end of the dock. I knew it was Marcus before he got close enough for me to see his face. I knew it from the way he walked, shoulders slightly forward, hands in his jacket pockets, the particular posture of a man who has been carrying something heavy for long enough that it has changed the shape of how he moves. I had watched Marcus walk toward me across 100 different distances over 40 years. Across the hospital parking lot the morning he was born, though I was the one walking then, and Margaret was the one waiting. Across the yard of the house on Ridgecrest when he was 7 and had fallen off his bicycle and was trying very hard not to cry until he was close enough to let himself. Across the parking lot of his high school graduation, in the June heat gown, slightly crooked diploma in one hand, the particular pride of a young man who does not yet know how much of life is still ahead of him. I knew the shape of how Marcus moved, the way you know the shape of something you have been looking at your whole life. This shape was different. This was the walk of a man who had arrived somewhere he had not planned to arrive by a route he had not planned to take, and was not entirely sure what he was going to find when he got there. He stopped at the edge of my stall. He looked older than 40. He looked like a man who had not slept well in 3 weeks, which was probably accurate. The cold had gotten into him. His jacket was the light one, the fall jacket, not the heavy coat he should have been wearing in December at 4 in the morning on a California dock. He had not thought that far ahead when he left wherever he had been staying. Or maybe he had not had the heavier coat with him. I did not know where he was sleeping now, and I had not asked Patty when she last mentioned him, because there were things I was not yet ready to know. "Dad," he said. His voice came out rough, like something that had been left out in the cold too long. "Can I come home just for a while?" I kept working. I did not look up. My hands knew what to do with the crates, and I let them do it while I thought about what I was going to say and how I was going to say it, and whether saying it would matter. The dock was quiet around us. The water made its small sounds against the pilings, the soft, irregular percussion that I had fallen asleep to and woken up to for most of my adult life. A sound so familiar that I usually did not hear it at all, the way you stop hearing the refrigerator hum in your own kitchen. Tonight I heard it. I heard every small thing, the creak of the dock lines, the distant bell of a channel marker somewhere out in the dark. The particular silence of a man standing a few feet away from you, waiting for something you are not yet sure you are able to give. I thought about the $47,820. I thought about the 14 pages with the clause buried on page 7. I thought about the clip, 45 seconds clear audio porch light on my son's face visible in the frame when Brianna said what she said. I thought about the insurance form that had arrived at Coastal Pacific Life with a signature that was not mine and a name that was his. I thought about all of it, and none of it was the thing that had broken something in me. Those were Brianna's choices. People make choices I do not understand every day of my life, and I do not take it personally. What I took personally was smaller than any of those things and larger than all of them combined. It was a nod. A single small nod on a cold November night on my own front porch in the light of the camera my son had installed with his own hands, on a Sunday afternoon 2 years ago, with the stepladder from my garage and the drill from my toolbox and the app on my phone that he had shown me how to use because he wanted me to feel safe. He had built the thing that caught him, and when the moment came, he had nodded. Then I set down what I was holding and looked at my son. He had Margaret's eyes. He had always had Margaret's eyes, that particular shade of brown that looked almost amber in certain light. In the dark of the dock at 4 a.m, they just looked tired. Tired and young in the way that people sometimes look young when they are ashamed, as though the shame has stripped away whatever it was that made them look their age. Margaret would have known what to do with this moment. She had always known what to do with Marcus in ways that I had sometimes understood and sometimes not. She had a patience with him that was different from mine, softer at the edges, more willing to wait out the difficult passages. I had loved that about her, and I had also in certain moments envied it. I did not have it. I had other things. I had the 40 years and the notebook and the scale I calibrated every morning, and the knowledge that a number was either right or it was not, and pretending otherwise did not change what it was. You didn't lose me because of Brianna, I said. I want you to understand that. What she did, that was hers. But Marcus. I held his gaze. You lost me the day you stood 6 feet from me and watched her say she was going to destroy my reputation, and you nodded. Not because she forced you, because you wanted the house. The words landed the way I had known they would land, not like a blow, but like a key turning in a lock that had already been waiting to open. Marcus's face did not collapse. It did not harden. It simply became very still, the stillness of a man hearing something said out loud that he has already said to himself 100 times in the dark of whatever room he had been lying awake in. Marcus opened his mouth. Nothing came out. I picked up the crate and turned back to the work. Behind me, I heard him standing there for a long time. The dock moved slightly under the weight of him, the way docks move, the small give of wood on water that you feel in your feet before you consciously register it. I felt him standing there. I did not turn around. Then I heard his footsteps moving away down the dock, getting quieter until the only sound left was the water and the lines and the ordinary dark of a December morning on the California coast. I kept working. The fish needed sorting. The ice needed checking. In 2 hours, the first customers would arrive, and the stall needed to be ready. And the sign above it said a name I had carried for 40 years and intended to carry for however many years remained, and none of that had changed. None of that would ever change because of Marcus or Brianna or anyone else who had looked at what I built and decided it existed for their benefit rather than mine. I kept working. The sun came up the way it always did, without asking permission, without announcing itself, just a slow brightening over the eastern hills that turned the water from black to gray to something that on a good morning looked almost like silver. I tied my apron at the back the same way I had tied it for 40 years. Same knot. Same worn canvas. The sign above the stall was the same sign, freshly painted, the blue letters a little brighter than they had been last month, but the name unchanged. Earl arrived at 4:55 with 2 cups of coffee and set one on my counter without a word, which was exactly right. We worked side by side in the early quiet, the way we had worked 10,000 mornings before this one. The cold came off the water in long, flat sheets, and the first boats were moving out past the breakwater, and somewhere behind us, the marina was waking up, one light at a time. A harbor seal had taken up its usual position on the south float, motionless and indifferent to the cold, in the way that seals are indifferent to everything that does not involve fish. A pelican worked the surface 50 yards out, with the slow, methodical patience of a creature that has never once doubted what it was made for. I had painted the sign myself 2 weeks ago. I had done it on a Sunday afternoon with a 2-inch brush and a can of cobalt blue that I had picked up at the hardware store on Harbor Boulevard. It had taken about an hour. When I finished, I stood back and looked at it, and thought about the 40 years that name had meant something at this dock. And I thought about Margaret, who had helped me hang the original sign on a Tuesday morning in 1985, when we were young enough that the future seemed like an unlimited resource. And I let myself think about those things for a few minutes, the way you let yourself think about things that are worth keeping. Then I cleaned the brush and went inside and made dinner. At 5:30, a small panel truck pulled into the lot on the south side of the dock. Dot got out and began unloading folding tables. I had known she was coming. She had called 3 days ago to say she had signed a short-term lease on the empty space beside the bait shop, that she was going to open her breakfast counter here at the harbor, that she needed a fresh start somewhere the air was different. I understood that. The air at the harbor was different. It had always been different, salt-heavy, and direct, the kind of air that does not allow for pretense, that strips things down to what they actually are. Margaret had said once that you could not stay sad at the ocean for more than an hour at a stretch, because the ocean was simply too indifferent to your sadness to allow it to take root. I had thought about that observation many times over the years. I thought about it now, watching Dot set up her tables in the gray morning light, with the efficiency of a woman who had been running a breakfast counter long enough that the motions were in her hands rather than her head. Earl walked over and held a table steady while she set the legs. He said something I could not hear from my distance, and Dot said something back, and Earl nodded in that slow, deliberate way of his, and that was the entire exchange, and it was sufficient. I thought about what it had cost Dot to get to this morning. The money she had lost, $180,000 of retirement savings that she and her late husband had put away across 40 years of early mornings and late nights, and every economy in between. The jewelry her mother had brought from Georgia in 1962 in a wooden box with a brass latch. The months of silence she had kept, hoping her daughter would find her own way back to something better, and the night she had finally understood that the hoping was over. The morning she had walked into Peterson's and looked at a photograph on a computer screen and recognized the earrings her mother had worn on her wedding day. The afternoon she had sat in a plastic chair at the Pelican Cove Police Department and signed her name to a document that she knew would change everything, and signed it anyway with a steady hand, because the truth was the only thing she had left that belonged entirely to her. She had paid a price I would not wish on anyone. And she was here at 5:30 in the December morning, setting up folding tables beside the bait shop, because that was what people who were built from something solid did when the thing they had trusted turned out to be hollow. They found a different place to stand, and they stood there. I respected that more than I had words for. She looked up and caught my eye across the dock. She raised one hand, not a wave exactly, just an acknowledgement, one person recognizing another across a reasonable distance. The gesture of two people who had sat on opposite sides of the same damage and come out the other side of it still upright. I raised mine back. Earl returned to his stall. The harbor seal shifted on the float, and then decided against whatever it had been considering, and settled back into stillness. The first customers of the morning were beginning to appear at the far end of the dock, the sport fishermen who came before the sun was fully up, men in heavy jackets with thermoses, and the particular focused quiet of people who know exactly what they came for. I put on my gloves and turned back to the fish, and the work that was still there, the same as it had always been, the same as it would be tomorrow and the day after that, and every morning after that, for however many mornings I had left on this dock, with this water and this cold blue light coming in off the Pacific. The house on the bluff was still mine. The stall was still mine. The 40 years of early mornings, and the name on the sign, and the notebook in the drawer, and the life I had built from the ground up with my own hands, all of it still mine. Marcus had made his choice. Brianna had made hers. Dot had made hers. I had made mine a long time ago on a Tuesday morning in 1985, when I hung a hand-painted sign above a 15-foot counter, and decided that the only thing worth building was something real. The water did what water does. The morning came in the way mornings come. Some things you build do not break. I am not a man who speaks often about faith, but I believe God does not give you enemies to destroy you. He gives you enemies to show you who you actually are, and who, when everything is stripped away, is still standing beside you. That is this family story. Not a story about a house. A story about what happens when the people who were supposed to love you decide that what you own matters more than who you are. If I could say one thing to anyone watching, do not wait as long as I did. I saw the signs. I told myself family was complicated. Do not make my mistake. The moment someone treats your kindness as a debt they are owed, that is the moment to pay attention. These grandpa stories are not easy to tell, but I believe they need to be told, because somewhere out there, another grandfather is sitting at a kitchen table wondering if he is the problem. You are not the problem. If this family story reached something in you, if these grandpa stories reminded you of someone you know, leave a comment below. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you have not subscribed yet, the button is right there. We build something real here, one story at a time. Thank you for staying until the end. The stories ahead contain some fictional elements, crafted purely to illustrate real human experiences. If that is not the content for you, no hard feelings, step away and find what serves you better. But if you are staying, I will see you in the next one.